South America, 15 million years ago. A monster creature called the terror bird is the king of beasts in this entire continent. Then, the terror bird treks 7,000 miles to North America. Here, fierce wolves and saber-toothed cats rule the land. And the giant bird has a fight on its hands. In this epic conflict, who would prevail? The birds from the south or the beasts of the north? In the chronicle of life on Earth, dinosaurs reigned as history's greatest predators. They ruled the planet for 150 million years, but came to a sudden end 65 million years ago. Many believe an asteroid or comet killed off the dinosaurs. Once they were gone, the job of top predator was open. Mammals would become great predators on the rest of the planet. But in South America, things were different. The Isthmus of Panama had not yet appeared, and waters surrounded the continent. In this isolation, evolution took a strangely different turn. The continent was a giant island, laced with open savannas bordered by forests. Here, the mammals were docile plant eaters, ranging from large sloths to bizarre armored creatures such as the glyptodont. In this setting, the role of top predator went to a family of freakishly monstrous birds. Today, we call them the terror birds, and they ruled for 58 million years.
If you look at the head, is enormous, like in all terror birds, and the bird would have been able to strike with enormous force, and such a force that by hitting a prey, it would have possibly killed the prey almost instantly.
How could birds have attained such power? Evidence of the true nature of these enigmatic beasts is found first in fossil beds and later in scientific laboratories. But the terror bird family remains largely a mystery. The fossil record reluctantly giving up clues in an ongoing investigation that began more than 120 years ago. The year was 1887. Paleontologist Florentino Ameghino wrote of a fossil unearthed in Argentina's Patagonia region. It was part of a strange toothless jawbone from a skull that would have been 2 feet long. So big, thought Ameghino, it must belong to a mammal.
Then, in time, with more discoveries and more studies, he realized that he had made a mistake.
It took scientists another 4 years to identify the big predators as birds. The key clues were in the center of the fossil bones themselves. Dr. Luis Chiappi is one of the world's foremost experts on these creatures. He studies terror birds at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles.
Sometimes it's not easy to tell apart a bird bone from one that is either of a mammal or another reptile. But one thing that in general is quite consistent is that bird bones are hollowed and they have very thin walls, as opposed to the bones of reptiles or mammals that are not. Here on my right hand, I have the bone of a crocodile, and you can see the difference.
In time, a scattering of other fossils was discovered. Birds, yes, but what kind? They were undoubtedly big and certainly flightless. And then, skulls with sharp hooked beaks turned up, meaning these were monster carnivores.
When they finally found a complete skull of a terror bird, they knew then that it was not a toothless mammal, but that in fact it was a predatory bird, and a gigantic predatory bird.
Hooked beaks and sharp talons are two characteristics terror birds share with all modern raptors. But scale it up to the size of a 6-foot, 400-pound bird, and the result is frightening. In the 100 years after the first discovery, scientists collected enough fossils to identify 17 different species of terror birds. They varied widely in size and lived at different times during a period nearly 60 million years long. But in 2005, the unexpected happened. What appeared to be a totally new terror bird. As an active predator, a 300 to 400-pound terror bird had to eat 20 to 30 pounds of food a day, and the isolated continent provided it, remaining for the terror birds a virtual Garden of Eden.
You really are talking about a smorgasbord of potential prey with very little competition that the terror birds could feed upon, some of them reaching quite large size.
But nothing is forever. Our planet is an ever-changing one, and for the terror birds, the paradise of isolation would begin to crack with the rumblings of a volcano. Until 1961, scientists thought terror birds lived only in South America. But a lump of leg bone and part of a toe raised an intriguing new possibility.
When Titanus was first found in North America, it wasn't believed. It was thought that it had to be something else.
This videotape shows scientists working underwater in Florida's Santa Fe River at the exact site where they found fragments of a creature identified as Titanus walleri, the first and still the only terror bird known in North America.
Can you imagine the thrill that it was to have this first specimen, an unknown species that was here in Florida?
This creature, from a continent isolated from the world by water, ended up nearly 7,000 miles from its origin. Its route was paved in the lava and ash from Earth's volcanoes.
Oh, this is a big volcanic ash, a lovely piece of ash. Really very
In Central Oregon, geologist Greg Ritalik shows paleontologist Jordy Duckler how volcanoes can quickly change a landscape.
Part of a big eruption. It's a rather unusual kind of volcanic eruption.
Ritalik says the deposit in Oregon was created by an ancient eruption in the Pacific Ring of Fire, a string of more than 400 volcanoes ringing the Pacific Ocean from New Zealand to Chile. Part of that ring is in Panama, where North and South America were once separated by a water gap.
The two continents were joined by volcanic activity in the Central American Isthmus in the late Miocene when the terror bird was on the march.
The connection was formed largely from lava-producing volcanoes rising from the sea, as well as the uplifting of tectonic plates. But there's more to the story. The native jungles of the new land in Central America were not the kind of environments through which terror birds would have migrated. That's where volcanic ash deposits like the one in the Pacific Northwest come in.
Mount St. Helens was an eruption of this sort, but it just created about 1 meter of ash. This one created 110 feet of ash, and at 600 degrees centigrade, it was a much bigger eruption than Mount St. Helens, and it would have created enormous stretches of open country.
The volcano that created this deposit exploded 200 miles away. The thick layer of rock it left behind can be seen in places over an area of more than 120,000 square miles.
The unfortunate creatures that are in the way of this flow, they're gone.
They're toast. Everything. There are trees, animals, all sorts of things. They're just burnt to a crisp. There's no sign of it. 600 degrees centigrade, that's more than a crematorium.
How fast are we talking about in the motion? Anything you could outrun?
Well, no, they couldn't outrun this. This is death on wheels.
Between 3 and 5 million years ago, eruptions like this in Panama resulted in what Ritalik calls instant land resurfacing, destroying jungle and briefly giving terror birds pathways to the north.
So for the short period of time when the plants come and recolonize this devastated landscape, there's a lot of open country for open country creatures like terror birds, for example. If the terror bird encountered eruption of this sort, if it survived it, it could migrate through that new country for 200 or 300 miles.
The bones of Titanus in Florida are strong evidence showing that terror birds use the Isthmus of Panama to migrate to North America. When volcanoes filled the gap between the two continents, the resulting land bridge made migration possible. The birds expanded into familiar savannas, now accessible by the new route.
I think terror birds are like many other species that if the habitat is present, they'll try to occupy as much of it as possible.
Since the original discovery in 1961, only a handful of North American terror bird fossils have been found.
Presently, in North America, there are 42 specimens of Titanus. 41 of those specimens reside here at the Florida Museum of Natural History.
Without a skull or any other large fossils, it's almost impossible for experts to piece together a complete picture of the North American terror bird. All they have to work with are scant bone fragments. Irv Quittmeyer calculated the key dimensions for Titanus by comparing the proportions of its bones to other terror bird species. For instance, he used the base of the Titanus leg fragment to figure out the whole bone's length.
When we examine this bone, we see that it's quite broad, and such a base must have supported a long shaft of bone and a tall bird. The way that this would work can be illustrated by using these lumps of clay and ruler. In a small base, this would just fall over. So it needs a large base in order to hold it in place, and with a smaller one here. So, a large base, long shaft of bone, tall bird. Smaller one with a smaller shaft, smaller bird.
Quittmeyer's numbers game involved comparing measurements from 16 different terror bird species. He even investigated the South American Seriema, the terror bird's closest living relative. The calculations provided the critical dimensions needed to build the Florida Museum's spectacular metal skeleton of Titanus. A complete view of the terror bird as a whole. Scientists concluded that Titanus was strikingly similar in form to Kelenken, the tallest of the terror bird species. But Titanus is about 20% shorter. The smaller size may have made it faster and more agile. The terror birds that came north were part of the Great American Interchange, a broad exchange of species between North and South America by way of Panama. The terror bird needed its speed for the new prey it encountered. Chasing a swift horse would have been a challenge for Titanus. The fastest running birds in today's world are ostriches. Similar in shape and size, they offer us a way to figure out how terror birds ran.
Some terror birds compare very well